Hello everyone. This is Anil with you today and Jessica from yellowHEAD. And first of all, thank you so much for joining this webinar. I believe we're going to cover so many important topics about ASO tips for the new year and how we can position our brand in 2021. And hello, how are you doing, Jessica?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm all good. Thank you so much. Just so much excited, actually. And just like, looks like we are ready to go. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely.
We can have a soft start. And let me tell you briefly about what we're going to talk about today. What are the topics that we're going to cover? So ASO tips for a new year, and we will learn how we can position our brand in App Store in 2021. What are the things that we should consider? And Jessica will be with us for your questions in the end. And yes, here we go. So let me talk about myself a little bit. This is Anil with you today, and I'm working in a mobile marketing industry more than 3 years. And I'm working in a MobileAction for the last 3 months as a customer success manager and ASO advisor. So far, I work over hundreds of customers, apps, and agencies, and was quite excited for me. I'm just feeling quite excited when I have a new one actually, and just probably because of my engineering and business administration background, I love working with data, and mobile industry let me work combine my interpersonal skill with this data. This is why I just really love about it. And just Jessica, would you like to tell us about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Jessica. I'm an ASO specialist at yellowHEAD. I have about 5 years of experience in marketing, both in paid and in organic. So I've been lucky enough to work on a huge variety of client verticals too.
Thank you so much. And just would you like to remind something before going into agenda? And I'll be really appreciated if you leave your LinkedIn profile links, and we'll leave a poll for you. It will be really helpful for us to understand about you, and for also giveaway surprise part will be quite helpful for us. And if we cover a little bit, what are the things that we're going to talk about today? We'll just talk about briefly about companies, about MobileAction, searches.com, and yellowHEAD. And on section 2, 3, 4, and 5, I just don't want to go details, but we're going to cover everything about positioning your brand. There will be lots of beneficial information, and Jessica will be with us on in section 7 Q&A part. I'm just keeping section 6 as a secret now. Just would like to tell you about surprises. There will be great surprises both from MobileAction searches.com side and from yellowHEAD side. And the thing that I would like to remind one last time, please feel free to leave your questions. You shouldn't have to wait until Q&A session. And just when it pop in your mind, feel free to send them to us. Here you go. And company overviews. Just would like to tell you just a little bit about MobileAction. MobileAction founded in 2013 as the ASO agency, and 2015 evolved into launched App Intelligence and ASO Intelligence suites. And 2018 it took its final form and became a full stack App Store Insights suite with launch of great features like Market, Ad Intelligence, and ASO Intelligence. So far, MobileAction provide mobile insight for all scale of from individual developers to biggest agencies all across the world. And in 2019, searches.com, our sister company, started as paid service, Apple Searches automation tool. And 1 year before, in 2020, searches.com became Apple Searches partner officially. And yellowHEAD, here we go. Jessica, would you tell us?
Sure. So yellowHEAD is a performance marketing company. We help brands grow through a blend of marketing efforts and technologies. We run campaigns across UA, SEO, and ASO. We also have our in-house creative team as well as our tech product called Allison. We have offices based in Israel, New York, and Europe. And a little bit about me personally is that I've been at yellowHEAD for a little over a year now. I've worked on the ASO team pretty exclusively, but I've also had the chance to work pretty closely with the UA teams and creative. And again, I've worked on a lot of different clients, so it's been a very fun time.
Thank you so much. And here you go.
Great, thanks, Anil. So our webinar today is about app positioning. To dive right in, we want to get started with talking about what do we mean when we say app positioning. So I think as ASO specialists and as developers or people who work closely with apps, when we talk about app marketing, we get a little bit caught up in what's actually going on in the App Store listing. So the keyword strategy and the creative strategy. But talking about app positioning is going a little bit beyond just keywords or beyond creative. And it's discussing how you can use careful marketing and positioning to make sure that wherever your app is featured or shown in the store, it's in a place where it's primed for conversion. So the number one place that we really start with positioning is talking about categories and choosing categories wisely. So to dive in, our first point is really what even is a category? So a lot of ASO specialists and developers know that when you set an app live, you're asked to associate it with the category. And a category is pretty much what you'd expect. It's basically just a broad term to define your app. But the category here is important for two main reasons. The first one is that when you're in a category, you get a category rank. And why that's important is because, let's say I'm a user who's looking for a game on my phone, but I don't have a specific game in mind. So I might just go over to the games category and I might scroll through the games that appear there. And if I see one that I like, I might install from there. So you can imagine that if you're ranked pretty high within your category, you get a lot of browse installs and browse impressions that way through your rank. But the second reason why category is really important, and this actually might be the more important reason, is because when you have a category, when you choose a category, you're basically signaling to your store what your app is about. And that helps the store associate you with other apps that they identify as similar to yours. And where that really comes to life is if you open up an app store listing for your app or a different one, and you scroll to the bottom, you'll see a section called You Might Also Like, or Similar Apps. And what this is the store algorithm is pulling together apps that they deem similar to yours, and they're putting it at the bottom of your store listing page. Similarly, your app is also being featured in other apps, similar apps. So we've seen that category plays a really key role in the apps that are included in this similar app section. And we see that when you change your category, the array of competitors that you're included or you're tied with really can change drastically. So as an example of that, we have one partner that we work with. That's an app that helps children practice reading. And they started off in the books category, which is relevant to them. They are, a books related app. But they decided to switch to the education category after a little while. And what they saw was that the apps that they were being associated with, so they're similar apps, really drastically changed. So they went from being featured with sort of general book apps like Audible, and instead they were featured with apps that are really specific to childhood education. So other apps that also provided reading services for children, or apps that really provided educational tools and help for parents. So by changing to the education category, they moved away from being associated with sort of general book apps like Audible, which again appeals to people who like reading, but not specifically children. And they started really being associated with their more direct competition. So apps that also cater towards parents who are trying to help their young children with reading. So again, those are really the two reasons why category is really critical for drawing in browse impressions and browse installs. Another little plus about category is that if you're ranked in the top 100, you get a little badge on your store listing page, which is neat. But what you can probably guess, and this draws us into our next point, what you can probably guess is ranking just in the top 100 doesn't really do a lot for your app in terms of browse visibility. So again, if we go back to my example earlier, if I'm just scrolling through the games category and I don't have a game in mind, it's a little unlikely that I'm going to scroll through, 95 different apps, finally land on one app that I like and convert from there. So being ranked within the top 100, while it's nice, it's not really the prime reason why category rank is important. So that brings us, or why category is important. So that actually brings us to the first point here, which is being a big fish in a little pond. So I think, everyone wants to be number one in their category, but I think a lot of developers and a lot of ASO professionals too tend to sort of want to be part of the bigger categories. So the most popular, the most saturated categories. They want to be number one in games or education or business, whatever fits. But as you can imagine, it's really hard to achieve that kind of rank for most apps, because every app has a category, every app is ranked within that category. So especially when you're looking at the really saturated categories, it's really hard to rank high. So for example, we work with one partner who's a retailer app, and their specific product is that they give diaper discounts. So for a while, when they started off in the shopping category, which, again, it very much relates to their brand. They're very much known as a shopping brand, and they're a household name. But even by being a household name, and even by being associated with a huge brand, even then, they still were not able to achieve a huge rank in shopping. They were only ranked maybe 50 plus, which again, is not a lot of visibility. So we'll use this example a lot, but what actually happened is they switched from shopping to parenting. And you'll see if you look at the chart here, we have sort of a list of all of the categories in Google Play by their saturation. Shopping is about number 10 of the biggest categories. Parenting is much smaller. It doesn't even appear here. It's a number 32 out of 33 categories. So it's actually one of the smallest categories that there are. And we were a little concerned at the time that by moving from a giant category to one that's a little bit more niche, that we would lose out just on traffic overall, because less people are going to the parenting category than shopping. But that's not really, we didn't have the adverse effects that we expected. In fact, moving to parenting was actually a great move for the app, because what happened is that they soared to the top of the ranks of the parenting category. They've been consistently in top 5 ever since we've made the move. And we've really seen a lot of browse impressions and installs come through from our category rank. So what's important to note from this example is not to be intimidated necessarily by smaller categories. So if you are a big fish in a little pond, if you have a small amount of extremely relevant traffic, at the end of the day, that's really what we're looking for. We're looking for relevant traffic. We're not looking for huge amounts of impressions from generic categories that users really don't fit into. So again, we like to say if there's a giant category that you feel is the best fit for you, then fine, you can start there. But if there's a smaller niche category, we see that apps see a lot more success in those smaller categories, as long as they're relevant to their product.
Absolutely, actually, just changing category or deciding which category we're going to publish our app is quite strategic decision, which should be given quite carefully, and results might be quite bad actually. And also considering about competition in categories also another important part that we should keep our eyes peeled.
For sure. Yeah. And we'll talk in more detail too about how to analyze the competition in terms of category and other metrics as well. But yeah, choosing the category is important. The good news, and then we'll talk about this too, but choosing a category is not, you don't make the choice once and you forget about it forever. You can always adjust your strategy later, and you can change categories and play around with it a little bit, which is important to keep in mind too.
Absolutely.
So in terms of defining your category and figuring out where it might be a good fit, it's really important to consider who are your users, and more specifically, who do your users identify as? So let's go back to our example with the retailer that gives out diaper discounts. So when we were in the shopping category, a big chunk of the way of how we were analyzing our users, or just thinking of our users, was as shoppers, which is true. Someone who is buying diapers or using discounts on diapers is certainly a shopper. But considering users as shoppers is really broad. So for instance, I am also a shopper, let's say, but even if I love discounts and love coupons and hoard them at home, even if I do all that, if I don't have children at home, or if I don't have anyone who needs diapers, this app is just simply not going to appeal to me, and I'm just not going to convert. So instead of thinking of your users as, associating them or identifying them as their value to you, think about how they would try to associate or identify themselves. And of course, when we sort of peel back the layers here, the users of the parenting app, or the users of the diaper retailer, or potential users, they probably wouldn't associate themselves or identify themselves as shoppers. They would probably identify themselves more as parents, among other things. So it's important to think of your users, not just of them as who they are as your customers and what value they bring to you as a customer, like a shopper, but think of who they are and what sorts of categories and what sorts of apps they would be looking for based on their lifestyle. And when we sort of rephrased it like that, or reframed it like that, the parenting category really became a much more obvious choice than shopping. Great.
Absolutely.
Um,
It was a great case, actually. Like it was a great use case to understand actually how it looks like to decide
mhm.
the right category, actually.
For sure, yeah. And another thing that's important for positioning too, besides category, but can be considered as sort of a mini category, is tags. So tags are available on Google Play. You can have up to you can have 5 different tags associated with your app. And again, tags are really important, again, because they give a signal to the store about what your app is about. So you can have you can choose whichever tags you feel best align with your product. We have a couple of tips on choosing tags too. So for instance, we'd recommend thinking broadly about the type of users you'd want to draw in and the type of other apps you want to be associated with. So for example, if you have a business app, then of course we would recommend including tags that are really related to your core business functions. So, the business tag, of course, productivity, communication, etc. But say you have a couple of other features on your app that might not be, directly related to business, but they're features that users use. And we see that they're features that users like, but they're features that users might not automatically associate with your brand, or they might not know about those until they download. We would recommend including tags that also speak to these features. So for example, if you're a business app, but you also have an ability for your users, to shop online, then we would recommend including shopping as a tag as well. Basically, again, giving the store a sense that your app is really well-rounded so that you can be featured in a large variety of relevant places in the store. Great. And finally, one thing we would recommend being cautious about when choosing a category is to avoid projection. So thinking about where you really belong right now. So changing a category, if you do it strategically, again, this can have really positive effects on your browse metrics. But one thing we want to be careful about is understanding how users understand our app as it is right now. So gaining a good sense of user perception. And we never want the category to sort of be driving our user perception or driving our marketing strategy. What we mean by that is, for example, we worked with one partner who is a photo editor. And they were trying to position themselves as a photo editor for businesses. And they certainly had, features that helped businesses, that's not disputed. But what they decided to do to really align themselves more with business in general was they switched from the photo and video category to the business category. And this actually had a pretty negative effect on their browse traffic and on their metrics overall. Because what happened was, again, business is a huge category, one of the biggest ones in both stores. And what happened is that they were drawing in impressions from users who were looking at other business apps. So this photo editor was featured as a similar app for some of the biggest names in business. And while that drew in impressions, it didn't really lead to much conversion because these users, these potential users were looking at business apps and, maybe they needed a photo editor for a business app, but certainly not exclusively. Whereas if you think about it in the reverse, someone who's in the photo and video category probably does need a photo editor. And also, on the side, they might need a photo editor for their small business or for their venture. But it's a lot likelier that they would be drawing in those relevant users who really need their core functionality when they're in the photo and video category, rather than sort of projecting their marketing and projecting where they want their app to be by switching to business. So the main takeaway here is, again, understanding your relevance and understanding your core features. If your core feature is a photo editor, then really use that to your advantage. Stay in the photo and video category and stay in a place where you can really sort of make an impact rather than getting a little bit lost in a huge and general category like business.
Absolutely. This is why we are saying that giving these decisions a quite strategic one. There are lots of metrics that should be considered while doing that. And especially like taking support from the professionals might be also helpful, actually.
Definitely.
And there is a question that just popped in my mind, actually. This is also a question that we are taking from most MobileAction users. As a CS manager, actually, this is the question I'm facing mostly. So how we can increase our category rankings? Is there any good practice for doing that? Is there any recommendation you would like to give?
Yeah, that's a really good question that comes up a lot. And what we see that category rank is really driven by installs. So again, your category rank #1 is likely to be much higher if you're in a niche category. So if you're just competing with less competitors or less apps, you're likely to see a much higher category rank there. But it's mostly driven, once you're already in a category, your rank is mostly driven by installs. So if you increase your paid marketing, for example, and I should mention installs from any channel. So if you increase your paid marketing, if you make additional efforts to increase increase organic. If you do offline marketing, that increases your search installs. Whenever the store is sensing that there's sort of a ramping up of installs, that's a great way to really increase your category rank if you have the ability.
Thank you so much. It was a clear answer. Thank you.
Great. So in order to identify what category you should be in and really get a sense of where you belong, it's really important to know your brand and to know your unique selling points. And this is, of course, important not just for your category, but for your overall marketing strategy in general. So the first point here is how to find your unique selling points. So I'm sure, a lot of the people listening have their own strategies and your own ways of how you find your USPs, which is great. But we just wanted to recommend a couple that we've seen that work really well from our side. So the first one, of course, is obvious, is consumer research. Whenever you're able to do consumer research on your current users, potential users, anybody that you have, for sure, we would recommend doing it in order to identify, what it is that they like about your app and the features that really stand out to them. But one other tip that we would recommend too is analyzing in-app behavior and using what you find to drive your marketing strategy in the store. So what we mean by that is by analyzing your in-app behavior, you can identify your most popular features of the app and user actions that lead to retention, and then convert those into elements of your store listing. So for instance, if you have a dating app and you see that the moment of the match is the most engaging moment that users experience on the app, this is where, they really sort of prick up their ears and they start engaging and they spend more time with your app after they get a match. This is a really important metric to understand and to use in your store listing. So if the match is really, the feature that users love most, we would recommend, taking an image of the match UI and putting that in your graphics, putting that in a really visible place in your graphics. We would recommend using the keyword match. So include that in your graphics as well, test that in your short description, add it to your title. Anywhere that we can highlight this feature that we know users love is an amazing way to really help boost our installs, but also make sure that we're upkeeping retention with the installs we drive in. So for example, if a user installs the app because they see that there's a certain feature that's highlighted all over the store listing, and when they actually download the app and when they open the app, they see that feature and they're able to, engage with that feature, it's a great way to get to really improve user retention, because users are downloading based on this feature that we've promised, and that feature is a core function of the app. So analyzing in-app behavior is really key, and it's a great way to drive your marketing strategy for your store listing.
Thank you so much. So you just mentioned that strategic keyword targeting, targeting these keywords in your metadata pool. I just would like to ask something. This is also a case that I just faced a couple of days before, and actually this is also, I think, most of our users are challenging actually. So let's say we have a unique feature which we would like to show our users, audience, and just this is a thing that makes us different from other apps on the same category or same area. So how we should deliver this feature to our users? Let's say this feature has a quite low search score, but still we would like to show this to our users. Should we use this in our metadata? Is it a good strategy to apply, even taking into consideration we're going to lose our organic rankings since it has a low search score? Or is there any other way to deliver this message, this feature to our users?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, of course, it always depends on context and the word itself, and how relevant it is. If it's a keyword that can be applied to very many apps and it also has a low search score, then maybe we wouldn't recommend emphasizing it so much in a keyword strategy. But again, what we would really do is we would recommend actually putting a visualization of this feature in your graphics whenever possible. And again, in really visible positioning. So if you have a feature that it's really hard to convert into writing or to convert into your keyword strategy, definitely graphics is the way to go. And it depends on the app too, but if you're able to set up a promotion or anything like that, and allows users to access this feature specifically, then that's something we would recommend doing as well.
Thank you so much. It was quite clear.
Sure. Great. Then one other piece we wanted to talk about for finding your most popular features and really identifying your USPs is checking out reviews. So reviews, of course, get a lot of attention, and particularly bad reviews get a lot of attention because, they help point out pieces of the product that can be improved, what any issues that users are having, things like that. And I agree that, the negative reviews, it makes sense why they take sort of priority. But what we would recommend doing in order to really access your USPs and identify them is taking a close look, or as close of a look as your positive reviews. So seeing, in your positive reviews, what trends keep reappearing. You'll see what users really love, what they keep talking about as their favorite feature. You might even get some keyword ideas from your reviews. But basically identifying positive trends in your reviews is a good way to understand what it is that users really love about your app. And one other thing that's related to this too is relatively recently, Google Play came out with an in-app review API. So by setting up this API, you can allow your users to leave a review in the app itself without having to head back to the store listing. So that's a great way, again, to sort of amass as many reviews as possible. And the more reviews we have, again, the more chances we have to take a look at the positive reviews as well and see which positive trends keep coming up. Then take those features that are mentioned and again, convert them into sort of marketable elements of our store listing page.
And also, it allows you to decide when it's gonna pop up to ask your users to give review or rating, and by this way you can place it on somewhere right, and you can ensure that you're gonna take good review from your users actually.
Exactly, yeah, and that's a good way to understand both too.
I love about it actually.
Yeah, that's very true. And if if you're using a feature that's one of your unique selling points too, then that's a good way to drive additional reviews, and then vice versa, use your reviews to understand and identify what your unique selling points are. Yeah, definitely a lot of benefits here. Great. So a lot of what we've been talking about so far is, identifying your unique selling points, identifying your core functionality and what sets you apart as an app, and really understanding your user perception and playing that up. But we do want to talk a little bit about also pushing the envelope a bit and expanding your brand identity, specifically through keyword targets. So what we mean by that is that, again, we always recommend, highlighting your core functionality and highlighting the features that users love. But for many brands and for many apps, we see that there's other features that they offer that users might not even be aware of. So for instance, we work with one partner who is, again, a business app. And again, they have their core functionality, which is, very much business focused. So when we were building out a keyword strategy for this app, of course, our main keywords were very much their core functions and, again, related to business. But what we wanted to do too is we knew that this app has a lot of other functions as well that users might not be aware of, even though it's a really well-known brand name. So what we did is we built these content pillars, so ideas of keywords that do not necessarily relate to business, but relate to other features of the app. So for example, event planning or shopping online. And we incorporated those keywords into our metadata as well. Now, what we saw by doing this is this actually had a pretty positive effect on the app. And the app started to be featured as a similar app, not just for its standard business competitors, but for a much wider array of competitors. So competitors that also make offer event planning services or offer online shopping features. And this actually did lead to conversion and a surge in browse traffic, again, for both installs and impressions, because as we've mentioned, the brand name is well known. So it's a trusted brand name and a trusted app. But basically by switching up our keyword strategy or expanding it a little bit beyond just our core functions, we were able to allow users to understand that there's features in this app that might be applicable to them that they might not have even realized before. So the keyword strategy is a good way to sort of test out what else works. If you see that adding keywords about another feature is drawing in a lot of relevant traffic, then for sure, keep diving into that feature. But it's also something that you could be tested. You can be testing. So for example, if you're really highlighting one feature in your app through keywords, but you're not seeing, that the similar apps that you're being associated with are exactly relevant, then that's okay. You can highlight a different feature too.
Thank you so much. So keeping track with your organic keyword rankings is also quite important to achieve this actually.
Definitely, yeah. This is important because, again, you can see how your keyword rankings improve for these sort of tertiary keywords. And at the same time, you can see in the store how this is applied when you see that your app is being associated with a wider array of competitors too.
Thank you so much. Absolutely, I agree with you.
Great. So when we talk about...
Sorry, I'm just interrupting you, Jessica. Just would you like to remind one last time, no, just we can go to the next session. Just would you like to remind one last time for the LinkedIn profile links and questions. You can leave all questions. I'm just receiving so many of them. There are really good questions between them. And just would like to remind about poll as well again, is just still keeping it secret for the giveaway part, but it will be quite just useful for us to decide, actually, for us to learn more about you, and it will be easier for us to help you on surprise part. Thank you.
Great. So our next section for considering app positioning, which is really important, is competition, and taking tips and tricks from your competitors, and in some cases going so far as to mimic your competitors in order to position your app more strategically or more wisely in the store. So what do we mean by mimicking competitors? So when it comes to leveraging your competition and understanding your competitors, the first step is actually a little bit counterintuitive. We would actually recommend just reconsidering your competitors altogether. So why do we say this? Mainly what we see is that for apps, sometimes it's easy to build out a competitor list pretty early in the product funnel and to really stick with this competitor list, even as the product evolves over time and as marketing changes. So it's really important to think a little bit outside of the box with your competitors and to reevaluate your competitor list pretty frequently. We would also recommend not just focusing on your direct competitors, but focusing and noticing your indirect competition and keeping a close eye on what it is that we're doing. So what do we mean by like indirect competition? We mean apps that offer do not offer the same product, so do not offer the same services, but their audiences are exactly who we're trying to reach, or their audiences are very similar to who we're trying to reach out to. So what a good example might be is, again, let's go back to our retailer that sells diaper discounts or provides diaper discounts. When we switched to the parenting category, again, we started to notice that the apps we were associated with are really different. So in shopping, we were associated, again, with giant retailers just like us. But when we were switched to the parenting category, our list of similar apps completely changed. And now we are being associated with apps that are related to, childhood education, that are related to baby monitoring, baby milestones and development, even pregnancy apps. And this is actually great because this really sums up our entire indirect competition, where again, their users are highly relevant and highly likely to convert, their users being parents of young children. They're highly likely to convert, even though they may not be seeking out our app specifically, so they didn't get to it through search, but they're highly likely to install if our app is offered to them. So what we mean by that is that by including our app as an app for, this indirect competition, the likelihood of conversion was really high. On the reverse side, when we were included as a similar app for some of other giant shopping retailers, again, they were definitely our competitors. We definitely, should be tied to them in some way. But the ask that we were asking for potential users was a lot higher when we were being associated with these shopping competitors. What I mean by that is that we were basically asking a potential user who's on our competitive store listing page, who scrolls to the bottom and sees our app at the bottom of this page. We're basically asking them like, hey, I know you're looking at a different page. I know you got here with at least some piece of intent, some element of intent, but we want you to move away. We want you to disregard this product and choose us instead. And that's a pretty tall order. But what happens when we really focus on the indirect competition and we associate our app more closely with our indirect competitors is the ask is a lot less. What we're saying, if we appear as a retailer that provides diaper discounts, if we appear on an app for, baby milestones, what we're basically saying is, listen, like we see that you're interested in this baby milestones app. You probably have a baby at home. We're not asking you to give up this app or to choose a competitor of it. We're not saying that at all. Feel free to download, but we also have a product that's a supplementary product that we feel is really relevant to you and can really help make your life easier. So again, the ask is really a lot smaller because we're not asking users, we're not trying to pull users away from the store listing page that they're at. We're really just trying to broaden their horizons and offer a product that we think can be really relevant to them based on what they're already searching. Great. So a couple of ways too that you can find your indirect competition is you can check out your app's current similar apps, the list of apps that appear at the bottom of the store listing. You can also check out other competitors within your category, or of course, other categories that you think might be a good fit for your audience. Again, not even necessarily thinking of categories that are a good fit for your product, but thinking of the categories that would appeal to the user, to your potential users. Another way we would also recommend figuring out your indirect competition is always through consumer research, but specifically asking users what other apps do they use. And if you find that a lot of your current users or a lot of your really loyal users are using pretty much some of the same apps, that's a really good indication that this is your indirect competition. And these are apps that you also want to be associated with.
So this is also a quite common question that I'm taking from our users. So how we can target our competitors with our metadata? Would you like to tell us a little bit about this?
Sure, yeah. And that brings us to our last point here, which is sort of going head to head with your main competition. But there's a lot of ways that when you identify who your biggest competitors are, or just competitors that you want to be associated with, there's a lot of like different tips and tricks that you can do. So for example, what we found is that if you see that some of your main competitors, what you can do is you can check out the main keywords that your competitors are using. And you can actually lift those full keywords and apply them in your own store listing. So we don't mean, of course, like, copy their entire store listing page and put it as your own. But by taking those keywords that are relevant to both your app and this main competitor and using them sort of exactly as the competitor uses them, again, this sort of signals to the store that your apps have something in common, that your apps are similar, and you're likelier to see that your app is featured as a similar app for them, for that other app, or you're included in store features together. Basically, the store sees that you're using the same terms and ties you two together, which is a key way to sort of get a leg up on your competition, or at least compete with them evenly. Besides keyword strategy, though, there's a few other ways you can do sort of a similar strategy. For example, with creative, if you see, for example, that there is some creative trend that your main competitor is doing, or if you try to make adjustments to your icon, for example, to look a little bit more like your competitor's icon. Again, these are all ways that we signal to the store that our two apps are similar and should be associated together whenever possible.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Great. And then one final point about competition is how to perform a competitive analysis. So again, I know there's a lot of different tips and tricks of how people pull together competitive analyses, but we just wanted to offer again a couple that have worked well from our side. One thing that really we recommend doing is taking a look at the bigger picture. So one way to do that is to pull together all of your competition, both direct and indirect, and to take all of their graphics and put them on one page on your computer, on your screen, and just look at it from afar and just see what sorts of trends can you pull out at a glance. So is there certain color schemes that everyone is using? Are there certain other creative trends that you're really seeing obviously when you look at it from afar? And this is a good way to understand if your app might have any gaps in their creative strategy or ways that really set you apart, maybe even in a negative way from your competitors. So once you do that, once you sort of get an idea of a bigger picture and bigger trends that are going on in the space, then of course we would recommend taking a really close look at your competitors and zeroing in. So of course, taking a look at their keyword strategy, again, seeing which keywords they're using with the most frequency and seeing if we can apply any of those keywords directly in our store listings. Also seeing what they're doing from a graphic standpoint. What kind of creative are they using? Are there any sort of ideas and findings that we can pull from their creative and try applying and testing in our store listing?
I'm sure if our users' attendants apply the method you just mentioned, they're going to realize, no surprise, that most apps or competitors in a specific category are just applying similar creative strategies, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a really good way. It's not just to get inspiration, but it's a good way to really alert the store that your apps have something really important in common and should be associated together. What's also really important to do with a competitive analysis is to make sure you're doing a competitive analysis separately for each market that you're in. So you'll see that with different markets, there's very different results in terms of which categories appear in the top charts or which apps appear in the top of their category per market. That's really that's likely to change depending on the market you're in. You'll see lots of different creative trends depending on the market you're in, and of course, different keywords in different languages. So it's really important to, when you do a competitive analysis, to make sure you're doing it for all of the markets that are important to you and seeing what your competition is doing in markets that are important for them.
Absolutely.
Great. So we've talked about so far, really covers a big part of app positioning, from using your competitors to leveraging your best features in your brand, and also choosing things like category and the apps that you're associated with wisely. But there is one final note that we do want to impart before we finish up, and that is to never assume. Of course, there's a lot of findings that we have and a lot of findings that users in the audience have pulled together, but we want to always clarify that it's always important to test any hypothesis whenever we can. So luckily enough, in the Google Play Store, we have a lot of different options for testing, but we really do want to make sure to say that it's really important to test any strategy that you have whenever possible. And it's also okay if you see that something isn't working, just sort of take a few steps back and allow that to redirect your strategy. So if you do a category change and it doesn't work out, it doesn't have the effect on browse impressions that you'd like, it's okay to go back to your other category or reassess, see if there's a better category that would be a good fit. This is especially important, again, if you have different apps. If you have several different apps, it's important not to assume that what works exactly one way on one app is going to work exactly the same way on the other. And particularly for markets, if you see that something is performing, especially for creative, really well in one market, always good to test in a different market and to do separate creative analyses to see the competitive analyses, to see the trends that are performing in a different market. Because again, we see that one market always performs really different than the rest. So it's important to not just blanket apply your findings, but try to test them out whenever there's an opportunity.
Actually, this is the part I really love about. The reason is always surprising agencies and app owners. The reason is, and just mostly, just sometimes most of it, your strategy and your audience users demand are not matching. Just let's say you just had a new new screenshot and thinking that it will work great. It looks way better than previous one, and you're thinking that it will work great. But when you make A/B tests, realizing that the old one was working better and deciding to move forward with the previous one, actually, this is the reason why we are always saying that never assume, always make A/B tests.
Definitely. Yeah. And we've seen surprising results too. There's some creative, that we come up with that we think unanimously on our side, we think this is the one that's going to win. And the results surprise us. And again, the results always change by market too. So you'll see that one app can have extremely different creative from one market to the other, even though it's really marketing the same product. So yeah, whenever possible, it's good to test and figure out a specific strategy based on which region you're in.
And also sometimes a strategy that your competitor is applying is not working for you. Just these kind of cases are happening so often, actually.
Definitely. Great. So that's everything we have in terms of our app positioning presentation. So I'll hand it over to Anil to discuss giveaways.
Thank you so much, Jessica. There was lots of important things that we learned, actually, I believe, and we cover everything which is important for positioning our app on the market. And now, just like we promised, our giveaways, and just would like to mention a little bit here, actually. As we know, ASO and Apple Search Ads are two complementary areas that are supporting each other. As soon as we manage to run both sides, it helps us to increase our organic rankings and installs according to that. It allows us to rocket boost it. So this is the reason on MobileAction side, we decided to offer giveaway. And you will be able to have one-on-one strategy call to learn that how to leverage Apple Search Ads to increase your organic rankings and ASO performance. And the only thing you should have done, you can click this link when we share meeting link with you. And please keep in mind, we only have 10 slots available. And your turn, Jessica. Is there any offer of surprise?
Yeah, so attendees are also eligible for a complimentary ASO consultation from yellowHEAD as well. So again, the offer will be sent to attendees by email.
So basically, the users who are attending just will be able to support their growth both for paid and organic site with these surprises, actually. And we can have a Q&A session. It looks like there are lots of questions. Let me have a look and try to find best questions. So yeah, there is one, just would like to mention. As we know, just ratings and reviews are quite important for organic rankings, and to actually turning negative reviews into positive ones, also quite important one. So there is a question like, just like actually we can transfer these questions something like, how often do you suggest to answer bad reviews? Like we can just basically turn it something like, what is tactic that you are offering us, advising us to not to take negative reviews, or what we should do actually to prevent it?
Yeah, so in terms of responding to reviews, we actually recommend responding to all reviews, of course, if your team has the capacity to do so, not just the negative ones. The reason for that is because it gives sort of a positive brand impression, and it gives sort of a positive sense of appreciating your users, and really giving users a sense that they have a direct line of communication with you. So when possible, we recommend not just responding to the negative ones, but responding to all of them in general. If there's limited resources, which of course happens, and negative ones are the ones that receive the priority, that's okay too. But again, we recommend, sort of gently understanding where the negative review is coming from, and then either providing a direct line of support or discussing the features or the changes that'll take place in the product, that'll directly combat, the negative element that the user is seeing.
Thank you so much. So there is another good one actually. Being featured is also quite important to increase both increase installs and ranking, keyword rankings. So there is a question like, what is the best way to get featured in App Store? Like being listed in categories, front pages, or is there anything you are recommending to do organically?
Yeah, it's a good question, because we get that a lot too, and features are a little bit tricky because there's not usually really specific steps that can be taken, but there are some little, again, tips and tricks that can help with featuring. Number one is that the iOS store, in the Apple Store, you can actually submit a form requesting to be featured. You can find that by in the store itself or by Googling the form, but it's pretty simple to fill out. It asks you a few questions about your app, and you can provide, supplementary marketing materials. Unfortunately, there's no guarantee if you submit this form that you will be featured, but at least it is sort of a direct line of communication with Apple that you can sort of raise your hand and say that you have an app that has certain features that we think would really be useful in so-and-so feature. Another little piece about that too is that what we've seen with Apple specifically is Apple really tends to favor the brands that follow brand guidelines or follow creative strategies, sort of in the same way that Apple itself does. So for example, Apple tends to smile upon apps that also have store listings that follow sort of Apple's minimalistic designs. So if they use like really clean screenshots that aren't very flashy or don't have a lot going on, again, sort of Apple itself's design, they tend to really smile on that as well. So if your app has any way to move, again, this depends on which category you're in and what type of app you are. But if you're able to play around with designs that look a little bit like Apple's itself, that's also a good way to get noticed by the store and potentially featured. But what we've seen too that are sort of more actionable findings is that by changing the keywords that you're using, so for example, with our business partner, we started including keywords that related to online shopping and the online store functions once we changed up the keyword strategy. And almost instantly afterwards, before we'd been featured as like a feature for online tools. And almost the day that we changed our keyword strategy, we started being featured every day for creating an online store. So this didn't exactly spark a new feature, but it completely changed the type of features that we were in. And the new features that we were in became a lot more specific to our product and to some of the features we were trying to highlight in our product.
Thank you so much. So there is also one which is quite common, and it says how long we should keep our A/B test active. So how many days are enough to realize that which version is working better?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, it depends on the app. So for some apps that get a lot of traffic, you'll see that you have significant results after 3 days of being live, something really small. For other apps that get less traffic, or if you're in a market, just a smaller market, you'll see that it could kind of stretch on beyond 2 weeks or even more before you have stable results. Again, ideally, it's always, best practice to wait until you have stable results, but that's not always so practical. Usually we recommend after about 2 weeks, if you're seeing sort of inconclusive results, the results aren't going to swing, hugely one way or the other. If the results are inconclusive after 2 weeks, they'll likely remain inconclusive. So if you don't have stable findings, we would recommend putting the limit at about 2 weeks. If after 2 weeks you do see something weird is happening, like if it's veering towards positive, then we would recommend, leaving it in the store. But 2 weeks is a good time frame to get a sense of how it's performing without just letting it linger sort of indefinitely.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Sure.
So there is also one quite interesting one. As we know, just App Store users and Play Store users are quite different. Their behaviors are quite different. Even their search queries are quite different, actually. Just surprising so much to see different search queries. Like, just thinking that people are searching something like this. And there is a question like, how do you recommend approaching creative strategy on iOS since you can't A/B test them like you can in Google Play?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there are, of course, third-party companies that offer A/B testing that you can use for iOS. So if you have, the opportunity to work with one of those parties, they can sort of mimic the sort of testing that Google Play does, again, as a third party. So that's one option. If that option is not available, then what we would recommend doing is checking out the trends that, your competitors are doing on iOS. So if you see that most of your competitors are running pretty much the same creative on iOS as on Google Play, then you'll see that maybe for your specific app or your category, there isn't such a huge difference between the two. So I would see that. And if that's really the case, what you could do is you could just run your experiments on Google Play and tentatively apply those, the really positive ones, to the Apple Store too. But what we would really recommend doing if you do that is monitoring your CVR really carefully on iOS. So if you adapt the findings from Google Play to iOS, then just make sure once it's live in the store that you're tracking CVR very closely and tracking installs in the days following to make sure it actually has a positive effect. But otherwise, what we see, again, generally what we see in the Apple Store is that apps on Apple tend to have, again, designs that are more similar to Apple's designs themselves. So they tend to be more simplistic. They tend to be a little bit less flashy than what we see on Google Play. And that's one of the key differences from our side.
So they can also use Apple search ads for it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Of course. This is the common way also.
Mm-hmm.
And what we can do, here you go. Yes, here's already a user who is recommending Apple search ads. Yeah, there is one. What is the effect adding new feature into app? How often you're recommending to add new feature into app?
You mean adding new features to your store listing page or to the actual product itself?
Yes, it is not mentioned, but probably just I think he's thinking that like, into product. This is what he tried to mention. Actually, this is what I'm thinking.
That's a good question. I think, from an ASO perspective, there isn't, a specific timeline that we would recommend new features. Of course, we recommend keeping an eye on reviews, seeing, negative reviews and fixing elements of the app based on that. Of course, we recommend keeping the product fresh and doing version updates every 2 weeks or so, if possible. But in terms of the actual product and how many updates there should be, what we would recommend from the ASO side is there's different ways to highlight sort of new product features. So again, you can try, including a new product feature as a test, as a short description test. So if you have a new product feature, try including that in the short description and see if that feature increases or ramps up conversion. You can also run promotions, again, that sort of highlight that new feature to see how well that performs.
Basically, like in my opinion, just showing that I care about my users. I'm trying to make my app better on every 2 week or just every way. And showing this to App Store also helps you to get better on organic. This is what I'm thinking, actually.
Absolutely. Yeah, the store is keeping a close eye too on the apps that are being regularly updated, that are regularly taking care of any bugs and fixes, as opposed to those that sort of just let their app stay static for a while.
Absolutely. So there is also a good question. Any thoughts on adding keywords in app name? Probably trying to say that like on next to our title, how we should decide which keywords we should use. What is the importance of the keywords that we are using next to our title, next to our brand name? Just I can convert it.
That's a good point. And sometimes the line is a little blurry here between, maintaining the integrity of your brand and also, including a keyword strategy. So for example, what we've seen is that actually if a developer name has keywords in it, that also helps boost the app's ranking for those keywords. So if you really want to promote a certain keyword, you can try to incorporate that into your developer name. Where that gets a little bit hairy is, again, making sure that we're keeping up the integrity of the brand. So we don't want to necessarily compromise, the brand name, or the name that we're tying ourselves to, for the sake of keywords. But on the other side, when it comes to the title, if we should be including a lot of keywords in the title, or if we should keep it simple, I would say it depends on how well known your app is. So if you have a really well known app that's very much a household name, and no one has any questions about what it's about, one strategy is to leave it as just that. So just have that be the name, and that's it. Sort of relying on and leveraging your brand name there. Some apps, or some products tend to think it looks a little bit spammy if you include keywords in the title. I don't really think so, but again, that's brand preferences, and it's important to maintain, the brand integrity and the name as, uncompromised as possible. But again, if you are okay with adding keywords to your title, then we would definitely recommend doing so. The title, keeping keywords in the title is one of the most influential places for keyword ranking. So if you are okay with the look and feel of what it looks like to have your brand name and then your brand name and then other keywords in the title, we would certainly recommend doing so.
Yeah, just title. The title is the first part, the most important part that
Exactly.
is indexing. This is why it is a wise practice to use most generic keyword in title actually.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a question which mentioned changing category. So so let's say we decided to change our category, but realized that it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And we decided to return back to our previous category. So of course, we will lose all of our category rankings. And should we start building reputation ranking from the scratch? Or is it easier if we return back to our previous category?
Yeah, so with category rank, it's not like, when you start in a category, you start from 0 category rank and then you work your way up. The app sort of assigns you a category rank from the get-go, and then your category rank fluctuates a little bit from there until it finds sort of a stabilization point. So if you switch categories and then you move back to your old category, it's not like you're starting from scratch. It's not like you're starting from absolutely nothing. The App Store is going to assign you a category rank again. And then from that point, depending on if you increase in installs in the coming months or you decrease, your category rank is going to fluctuate for a bit until it sort of stabilizes at a new level. What we can't guarantee is that if you leave a category and then you come back to it, that you'll have the exact same category rank as you did before. But there's no concern that you need to start completely from scratch and rebuild your app or rebuild your rank. You'll be assigned a rank as soon as you switch categories.
Thank you so much. And there is a question that I heard so many times for the last 3 months, actually. As you know, in Google Play site, long description is also getting indexed. And considering keyword density and repetition for the generic keyword are quite important to improve our organic rankings. So the question is what is your recommendation for keyword density or repetition number of any specific keyword?
Yeah, so with keyword density, we would recommend when you first start, ASO, or you first start building out your store listing page, you have a limit of 4,000 characters on your long description. So we wouldn't recommend maxing out on those 4,000 because what we recommend doing is modifications every month. So for example, for the first time you write your long description, we would recommend keeping it at about 2,500 or maybe 3,000 characters. From there, you set that long description live and you see how well those keywords are performing in the store. So you see if the apps you're being associated with are relevant apps, if you see how your keyword rankings are improving or how they're performing. And you get a sense of which keywords perform really well and which keywords maybe don't perform or don't do as much for your app. And so what we recommend doing is every 2 months or so by market, we recommend going back, analyzing how those keywords are performing and doing modifications on the long description. So taking out the keywords that aren't really doing well or not increasing in performance and adding in a new keyword strategy to see if sort of fresher keywords perform. And that's why we recommend not immediately starting with 4,000 because then it's a lot harder to see which keywords to pull out, where we can make new additions to add in. So that's one thing I would recommend, is to keep in mind that your long description is not a static piece of your store. It's something that we would recommend frequently updating to make sure that it's fresh and that it's actually useful. But the second thing we would recommend too is in some markets, we see that users don't really read the long description so much. So in markets like that, we can say, we can up the frequency a little bit. We never want to sound, too repetitive or anything like that, but we can incorporate, a higher frequency of terms. But we do see in some other markets, users actually do read the long description, or they look to the long description to help them understand the specifics of the app itself. So in markets like that, I would be a little bit more cautious. I would focus a lot more on the content and how it's written. But in either case, it's important to make sure that the App Store listing is visually appealing. So making sure that it looks really organized. You can add emojis if you want. You can add different bullet points to really sort of lay it out in a nice way. That because the App Store listing can be pretty long, we also want to make sure that if a user just glances at it, it looks visually appealing too, and it looks really organized. So again, the answer to that kind of depends on your market. But the good news here is that, again, we always recommend going back and analyzing how your store listing is performing and how your long description is performing, and making updates accordingly.
Thank you so much. So I would like to add something personal on that side.
Sure.
Yeah, just, more than actually affecting our organic ranking. So also to increase conversion rate. What kind of strategy we can track on long description or description in the App Store?
Yeah, so the conversion rate is a lot more affected by the title and the short description, or on the iOS, the title and the subtitle, than it is by the long description. So for that reason, a lot of brands, or some really well-known brands, choose to leave their title as just their brand. And again, that's less because they're focusing less on their keyword strategy, and they're focusing more on the conversion play. So they're thinking that just by leaving their title as their brand name, that's enough to inspire people to conversion, and it gives sort of a clean brand look. And so that's the balance there. When it comes to the long description, it's really not so much for conversion. Again, in most markets, in some markets, we do see that users read the long description pretty carefully. So for those, we would recommend, using keywords that we've seen lead to conversion. Or just in general, using sort of more of a content focus or a content writing focus. But usually we focus the conversion on the most visible parts of the App Store listing page. So the graphics, the title, and the short description. And then the long description, again, just has to look really neat and organized. And that's sort of its biggest play for conversion for markets where users don't read it, that it looks neat, it looks organized, and it fits with sort of the brand feel. And that's enough that we've seen for conversion there. Usually it's used for keyword improvements.
Thank you so much. So just having a look, it looks like we cover all questions. So yes, we have one here in the question Q&A side. And can you use long description from another app? Something like that. Or is it a problem for any App Store or Google Play? So to do some short changes. So just with making small changes, can we basically copy their long description? Or what might be the outcomes if we do so?
Yeah, so we recommend, taking bits and pieces from their long description. So if you have a competitor that is using certain keywords, we recommend taking those keywords or those long tails exactly as they are and applying them in our store listing. But in terms of copying the whole thing, you'd likely get flagged by Google right away. It's unlikely that would ever pass through the stores. Even if you have sort of two apps that are both your own, we wouldn't recommend using the same long description. Again, because it's going to get flagged by Google, but then also because you're sort of missing out on differentiating your app from your competitors too. Like, we want to associate them together. We want to make sure the store is associating them together. But at the end of the day, we have a lot of unique aspects of our app and of our product that sets us apart from the competition. And we want to make sure that we're highlighting those as much as possible.
So yes, thank you so much, first of all. And there is a question, actually, I couldn't properly understand, but the question is like, what is the best subcategory for games like bingo? Is it maybe so specific question? It might be just bingo kind of games are between casino games and board games. And is there, or just so I can convert it to something like this to make it more general instead of specific. So how we can decide which one is better for us? Like there isn't any specific category like bingo. So how we can decide, should we choose board or casino, something between two category?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think one thing to look at would be to look at the sizes of those categories. So again, if one of those categories, and I believe it would be casino, is significantly bigger, that's something to watch out for. That even though that by being in a larger category, again, it's really easy to get lost. It's easy to slip down in category rank. So I wouldn't necessarily focus on the categories that are more popular. I would try to figure out which category relates to your app still. That's relevant, but it's okay if it's smaller, provided that the other apps that are in that category are apps that we think are relevant for us. So if we see that other apps in the smaller category are really similar to ours, or that we see that our users are also using those apps, that's really what we want to look at. I think when it comes to if you're sort of in between categories, what I would really do is I would take a close look at who are your competitors in each category. Who would you be associated with? Again, not based on your product. So not even necessarily those that are offering exactly the same product as you. But those who have a really similar audience. And again, with something like games, it might, cross several different apps. So I think it would require a much deeper dive into your competition, identifying who your biggest competition is, identifying if you want to align yourself with a similar product or with a similar audience. And then from there, deciding where that competition is mostly living and choosing that category.
Thank you so much. So this will be the last question that I'm
Sure.
taking. And as we know, especially for gaming category, there's a huge competition, and there are loads of apps who are just focusing on a paid side instead of ASO actually. So, is there any different ASO strategy that you are recommending for game category, like casual mid-core games, like for example, football, sport game, or any other in general for game category?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, in my own experience, I haven't worked that much with games specifically. But I think, in general, when you're trying to figure out a new strategy, there's a lot of different, steps and tricks that you could take. So again, first of all, always to focus on the competitive analysis to see what your other competitors are doing. And again, finding ways to differentiate your app. So if you have certain features, again, that you see that users really love, to really put that in the forefront, especially with something like games. What we've seen is their screenshots and the creative that they use. That's really the main driver of the conversion on their store listing page, because their screenshots are so flashy and they're so full of UI descriptions, and they're full of differentiating what makes one game different from the other. I would say focusing on the creative strategy for something that's within a gaming app would be the number one step. Again, because among your competitors and among the category in general, there are so many other apps that have built out, really incredible creative strategies that show what is different about their app. That I would start from that.
Thank you so much. So
Sure.
this one was the last one actually. And I just would like to say that it was a great webinar. Thank you so much. I'm really appreciated. It was quite helpful for all of our attendants. As you can see that like retention was quite high actually. Just we almost finished with the attendance as much as we started. And I just hope to see you in future webinars. Maybe we can have another one together.
Definitely,
So
yeah.
please, just would you like to hear that? What are you feeling, and anything you would like to say?
Yeah, no, it was a great time, and thank you for all the wonderful questions, and for everyone in the webinar audience for the questions too. And of course, if anyone has anything additional to discuss, you're welcome to reach out to me or Anil, or our colleagues at MobileAction and yellowHEAD. And yeah, I look forward to hearing from you.
So thank you so much again. So thank you everyone for joining us today. It was a great webinar, and just there was lots of helpful insights and tricks and use cases as well. Really appreciate it to Jessica. She shared her knowledge, her experience with us, and cases that she faced with as yellowHEAD. And yes, and we can finish. So